We need everyone. It's all hands on deck right now in this moment in America.
All hands on deck, but who is that deckhand? If you don't know Michelle Wu, you should. The Boston City Councilor seems to be everywhere these days, and we sit down with her to talk about the woeful tea, the city's role in solving the problem, and even her take on former teacher Elizabeth Warren and former colleague turned Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. We also talk weed politics more than half a year in. How is legalized pot doing in Massachusetts? And why did it take so long to get a pot shop in Boston? The chairman of the Cannabis Control Commission joins us in studio. And we can't let the day go without some Decision 2020 talk. Two more debates coming this week. We'll check in with Allison King and Sue O'Connell to see whether the likes of Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris can continue to climb in the polls. It's time to talk politics on this Sunday morning. Thanks for joining us, everybody. I'm Brian Schactman. Now, if you consume news like I do, you've likely noticed a prominent face in Boston politics. Her name is Michelle Wu. Now, if we take a look, this is a bit of a pun because her Twitter handle is @WuTrain, and of course the tea has been a huge issue for the Boston City Councilor, and lately she's all over the place, from protesting the fare hike in the tea to traveling all the way to Iowa stumping for Senator Elizabeth Warren's campaign. So who is she and what does she have to say? First though, some Michelle Wu basics. Born in Chicago, educated at Harvard and Harvard Law, she's made Boston her home, and since her election in 2013, Wu has made the city council her job. She was the first woman of color to lead the council, and in 2017, her vote total was the most in 35 years. We caught up with her in Boston and touched on a host of issues, starting with the state of affairs in the city.
Boston has been changing so quickly in the last couple of years. We've seen growth and development and companies exploding here and people wanting to move here. But what that has translated into for far too many residents is just harder and harder to stay here. Housing prices that are out of control, third highest rents in the country, a transportation system that is crumbling with issues across every line that impact our daily lives, and racial disparities across the city that are just deepening because of this uneven nature of growth.
Do you think the mayor has been a strong enough advocate for the city in the transportation issue?
I think every single one of us has the responsibility to be on the front lines hearing about this issue. Any neighborhood that you go into, this is coming up.
People but are you talking more, like you have gone out there and been out front. You were against the fare hike, that didn't go, it went through. Have you elevated your profile on an issue like this because you think there's a void?
When we protested against the fare hikes in February, when they were first proposed, thousands of people came out and signed a petition saying they didn't want, it was not sustainable, it's too expensive, came to testify, and in fact that made a difference. Although a small one, it was an important one. The fare hikes as initially proposed were across the board. Everyone was going to have to pay more. It was only after that level of pushback that they scaled back and said, okay, no increase in bus fares, no increase in seniors, no increase for youth. So it makes a difference when people speak up, but we're now just at the point where everyone feels so beaten down that we need to not just talk about the issues, but how to empower people to be involved.
That brings me to two more points. First one quickly is what's next?
For the tea?
Yeah, all the transportation issues.
Yeah.
Like, so the fare hike went through. We still have tremendous problems. We probably have a generation of backlog, billions of dollars.
Yes.
So what do you do from the city councilor position to start that change?
Yeah, we need to keep pushing the governor to make sure that we're releasing emergency funding to make these short-term repairs. It's not okay that people are still late every single day to work after the derailments. In the medium term, we need to be thinking about governance and how we empower cities, riders, people to have a voice, and then in the long term, we need a plan that actually meets the needs of the Commonwealth.
I want to talk about Congresswoman Pressley. You obviously work with her on the city council. What has it been like to watch not only her go to Washington, but what's happened in the last month is kind of crazy.
I feel so happy that she is there.
It's tense though.
She's gone through so much, and she is doing exactly what the residents of the 7th Congressional District sent her to do, myself included. I'm proud to call her my Congresswoman, but the hatred and the rhetoric that is being thrown at women of color, at her and her colleagues, really just as a distraction, is very dangerous for the direction of our country. So I'm proud of everything that she's doing. I know we've been trying our best to know that we have her back here in Massachusetts.
Are you surprised at how high her profile has gotten in such a short time?
Oh, not at all. I mean, anyone who knows Ayanna knows what she is like in situations of stress, knows her incredible leadership skills and style, and this is exactly what she promised people she would do when she ran for the office.
Do you look at that and say, well, why not me? Like, I mean, do you look at yourself? I mean, your profile's been much more prominent, it seems. And do you look at Congresswoman Presley and say, why not me?
No, I say, great that it's Diana. You know, we're seeing an incredible wave across the country right now, and right here in Boston, of people stepping up to say, I'm going to get involved and I will do my part. And that has translated into an incredibly exciting election year right in 2019 for the council and for the city of Boston to connect with city government in a way that might make history a new way. You know, we could see a majority council, majority people of color, potentially majority women, potentially majority progressive. But I leave aside the political punditry and, you know, big questions that the media asks, because when you're out in the community, no one's thinking even to what happens after the 2020 election or beyond, because the issues are so urgent right now. T-riders don't care about what will happen, you know, next year. They want to know, when can we start getting to work on time? When can we actually start depending on the system and have housing that we can afford and see those gaps close in our schools?
I'm just curious about, you know, the President Trump versus the squad and all the issues that that's raised, but also we know you're a supporter of Senator Warren. What are your thoughts on how it's going for her vis-a-vis in her race, not only to represent the Democratic Party, but in her relationship with the president?
You know, I was just out in Iowa last weekend, stumping with her campaign, and the excitement around her candidacy is enormous. People are so hungry and ready to take on the fight in November. They are excited that she's put forward solid plans, not just of tinkering around the margins or how she would answer this position or that one, but this is how we fundamentally change the system.
You know, just last question on Trump versus the squad. It brings up so many issues that are negative, right? I mean, just about racism and sexism and so on. Do you think, how do we come out of this situation with a positive? And I don't know, it just seems to just highlight more the divide in the country than I necessarily see an opening for coming together. So how do you view all that's gone on between the squad, including Congresswoman Presley, and the president?
I think it's intentional that every time the president puts out a tweet, there's a big scramble to analyze and talk about, you know, what this means for more division or potential for progress. And those are all distractions. There are deep problems, and many of the problems that he promised to fix when he ran for office have gotten worse because of his and his administration's actions. I think people will recognize that, but we need to make sure that we are focused on what matters in people's daily lives, not the Twitter, not the day-to-day headlines. But
do you think it hurts the Democratic Party? In terms of because it's a distraction away, because a lot of people think it's purposeful on his part to make the Democratic Party look far left so they can get away from those issues and scare people when they go to the polls.
I think it's certainly strategic to try to paint everyone with a broad brush, but what it's revealing is that there are opportunities for everyday people, like the 4 congresswomen that have been in the news, who all come from backgrounds that haven't traditionally been reflected in politics, but because they raised their hands and said they were going to run, and because they ran with the backing of community, now we are seeing a different voice challenging someone who has just been so awful and so hurtful to communities all across the country. I think it's inspiring so many more young people to say, I can participate too, I can be a leader, you know, maybe in politics, maybe running for office, maybe in a different part of my life. We need everyone. It's all hands on deck right now in this moment in America.
Michelle, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Wu talked about how, yes, the tea fare hike went through, but they did win some concessions. She wanted more from the governor and more from the state. Now, not that it's just her, but that seems to be forthcoming as well. Late last week, Governor Charlie Baker filed an $18 billion transportation bill, basically to get more done and get it done more quickly. Up next, the politics of pot. We sit down with the chairman of the Cannabis Control Commission. Steve Hoffman joins us next on Talk Politics.
And I don't mean to be a hypocrite, because I lived through the 1960s, and you know, most of us visited that place in the 1960s. But I think we made a terrible mistake.
Depending on the dispensary, I would if I needed to. I've not needed to. Haven't had the occasion to purchase. So yeah, I'm not against it.
If my old lady wants it, yes.
What do you think about it?
I think it's more potent than, well, it's cheaper on the street. You can pick it up on the street cheaper than the dispensary, but the dispensary is more potent.
All in all, it's been a good experience.
Outstanding, wonderful, fantastic, marvelous. So, it made me feel super.
That's what you get when you ask if people have or would visit a dispensary to buy legal weed. As funny as that is, it does raise some interesting questions, especially as it relates to the black market, and we're going to talk about that in a sec. But first, a few numbers. In its first 6 months, aggregate sales of recreational marijuana about $140 million. Month-over-month sales continue to increase by about 20%, and interestingly, but not surprisingly, a little more than half the sales are from edibles, infused products, etc., not just from the bud, as they say. Average spend a little more than $44, and according to Cranes New York, this is a piece of information you likely did not know, nearly half of all customers, according to the publication, come from the state of New York. All right, let's talk more about pot politics with Steve Hoffman, chairman of the Cannabis Control Commission. So I want to start, first of all, thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
I wanted to talk about this for a while, but a lot of people at home don't understand exactly what the Cannabis Control Commission does. So in just as quick as you can, tell us what you do.
Sure. So the law was passed in July of 2017, updating Question 4, and the legal adult use of cannabis for recreational purposes was allowed.
Right.
And as part of that law, the governor, the attorney general, and the treasurer appointed a 5-person commission, of which I am the chairman. And our job is essentially to develop a set of regulations and then to enforce those regulations to allow for the flourishing of the adult use industry.
And you're the group that approves the permitting of licensing.
We developed a licensing process, a set of criteria, a process for evaluating them, and now we are in the process of actually reviewing and approving applications for licenses. Yes.
Okay, so from your perspective, how's it going?
I think it's going very well. I mean, we've had very few blips. We certainly get some criticism about the pace, but we're very comfortable with the pace of rollout. And we have an industry that I think is working for all the people of Massachusetts, given this is a very contentious issue. We're trying to find the right balance, and I think we're doing a pretty good job of it.
So, like, in terms of what's happened, there's no way to gauge or predict what's going to happen. What surprised you the most?
From day one on the job, just the intensity of emotion on all sides of this issue. The voter initiative was very close. It was 53-47 in favor of passing Question 4. And as I got into the job, I realized that on all sides, people are passionate,
right,
either in favor or opposed. There's all kinds of different perspectives. And because of the federal prohibition, there's not a lot of research. So it's essentially a fact-free debate. And so the intensity of the debate has been the thing that surprised me the most.
I want to bring up the Economic Empowerment Program because through that program, you know, Boston just got its first license. So I want to ask you, what took you so long for that? And then the real question is, what took you so long to get something with this Economic Empowerment Program? People don't know it's to give communities that might have been disproportionately litigated criminally for marijuana use and distribution to get economic opportunity through this new law.
So it's explicitly part of the law. It's a mandate that we take very seriously.
But only one out of almost 2 dozen.
So here's what's happened. April 1st of 2017 was the first day we were allowed to issue licenses, and we issued 122 priority application statuses to economic empowerment candidates. Of those 122, 10 have applied. And we've gone back to the 112 that have not applied and said, why not? And we've gotten 3 answers. One is they are waiting for a kind of license we haven't authorized yet, which would be social consumption or home delivery.
Right.
That's issue 1. 2 is they haven't been able to get through the city and town process, which precedes coming to the commission. And the third, and by far most important reason, they don't have money. They don't have money. But why the first one was approved in Boston,
right?
They just signed the first host community agreements in Suffolk County recently, and this was the first application we had from Boston.
You know, we talked to Michelle Wu, city councilor, about this, and you know, she talked about they're going to try to develop some sort of fund to help subsidize because they don't have enough money. But why can't you create a situation where the bar is lowered financially for people in these communities to get licensing?
The bar is, we've reduced license fees, in some cases eliminated license fees. We can't tell the cities and towns what to do, but in terms of states.
So you have incentivized?
Yes. We have, but even if you take the license fees and eliminate them altogether, it still costs money to get into a business. If you're talking about kind of a high real estate market, like expensive real estate market like Boston, opening a retail store probably will cost between $1 million and $1.5 million in terms of getting the real estate, building it out, getting the inventory. So, all we can do is, is create incentives by reduced license fees. We can't do anything at all about the other costs involved in opening a business.
Real quickly, we're tight on time. California, I've researched a lot about this, how the black market is still huge because of the pricing and the taxation.
Right.
Is that the case in Massachusetts still, and what are you doing to try to counter that?
Yeah, I think the black market, with 22 stores open statewide in Massachusetts, we couldn't argue that we've had an impact on.
So what do you need? Do you need 50, 100?
I think we need a couple hundred, to be honest with you, and we will get there over time. We are trying to avoid the problem that has occurred in both California and Oregon in terms of overproduction. We're trying to make sure that we don't produce more than we can sell, which if you produce more than can be sold legally, it's going to end up in the black market. Right. So we're trying very hard to make sure that we're controlling production, which has not been done as well, in my opinion, in California and Oregon.
Steve Hoffman, Cannabis Control Commission, we appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Like it all. All right, with all the hysteria over Robert Mueller last week, we almost forgot. There's a presidential primary going on, and we have 2 nights of debates this week. I will sit down with Sue O'Connell and Allison King to break it all down.
The President has repeatedly claimed that your report found there was no obstruction and that it completely and totally exonerated him. But that is not what your report said, is it?
Correct. It is not what the report said.
Robert Mueller did a poor job. It was devastating for the Democrats.
Welcome back to Talk Politics. Now, before we talk Decision 2020, we want to put a bit of a ribbon on Robert Mueller. We have Sue and Allison here. Is Trump right?
Was it painful at times to watch and even a little bit boring? Yes. However, the Democrats really achieved what they set out to do, which was to get Robert Mueller to check the exoneration box, check the Russia did help Trump win. Trump welcomed it. In that respect, it was...
he was so weak as a witness. That one moment that Nadler was in the first 2 minutes.
This is not a reality show, right? This is a reluctant witness who's nonpartisan testifying to a partisan group, right?
And they shouldn't have even brought him out.
Well, that's up to the Democrats. But if anybody had watched, and I have watched a lot of Mueller's previous testimony over the years, this is exactly who he is. He's not. It's not as good as his prior testimony, but he's very much who he is and what they got. They got on the record that the Russians have interfered and are interfering now with our elections. That should be the top line for everybody in America, regardless of their party.
I know, but the strange thing is that is the headline, but that's not what people seem to care about.
Well, stranger is Republicans celebrating what came out in this report, and that's a whole other thing that's kind of strange, which I think is going to come back to bite them.
Well, we'll see. Listen, I could talk more about it, but we have to talk presidential politics. We have 2 debates coming this week. Based on what we saw here in terms of the Mueller report's not going to get Trump the way Democrats want it. So no matter who wins anyways, is it too steep a hill to climb electorally to get Trump?
Well, there's been some news about Trump's favorability ratings, and if Trump's favorability ratings were the Electoral College, he would lose. But the challenge is, of course, that isn't how it lays out across the country. Wisconsin is going to be the state for the Democrats to have to win, regardless of who the nominee is, in order to take the White House back. It's all about Wisconsin right now in the race.
And it's so early, so much is going to happen. So I think it's so, way too early to say. I think Trump is definitely beatable. What are we talking about 6 to 8 months from now?
I don't believe any of the polls. I believe there's a huge part of the population that just will not tell those people how they really feel. They close the curtain and they go a different way. So that may be true. They're hard to rely on. Maybe the Democrat-only polls I'll pay more attention to, but the favorability stuff I'm skeptical about. But I want to talk about this week. We had a little bit of separation. It was really fascinating to watch the impact of Kamala Harris and what she did with Biden and the impact in the polls. I guess I just want to ask you, flatly to begin, what do you expect out of this?
Well, Biden has an opportunity to sort of repair the damage that some feel he did in the first round of debates. But I think that I'm more closely going to be watching people like Beto O'Rourke. There you go.
Oh, he was on that magazine cover, right?
Those kind of mid-rangey Cory Booker. What are they going to do? Because we know.
Call them the 3%ers.
Yeah, exactly. Elizabeth Warren's going to put in a solid performance. Bernie Sanders needs to up his act. Again, he needs to attack a little bit more. He didn't do any of that in the first time around, and I think he felt it in the aftermath.
Yeah, I'm interested in the Sanders and Warren face-off. Like, here's
because they're fighting for the same group.
Yeah, they've got the same slice of pie. They're living in the same space. Are they going to go after each other? Are they going to debate each other, or are they going to go after, you know, Biden? I mean, and Biden again, I think, is to Allison's point, the person to watch here. He was sort of, you know, clocked in the last debate, shocked that his friend Kamala Harris got him. Yeah, so let's see what Biden brings. He's figured out he's got to run against these people who are up on stage with him.
Two things really quickly. Do you think we'll finally get some reduction in, I would say, business-wise capacity after this
Well,
debate?
that's what I was going to say. If the mid-rangey, low-range people don't do something pretty bold to get a headline, I think they can sort of kiss this race goodbye.
And we've got 3 people who aren't on the stage, right, because of the Democrats' 20, you know, rule. You've got Gravel, our own Seth Moulton here from Massachusetts, Sestak. You know, what are they going to do? They're not even on the stage.
Quickly, forget about the polls. I'm going to do this periodically. Where you stand right now, give me your top 3 who are going to be candidates in the end.
I think Biden's your safe guy, Warren is your solid person, and Kamala Harris is the intriguing one. And I think those are your 3.
100%.
Agreed.
Totally agree.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it, as always. And coming up next on Talk Politics, my final thoughts. There is so much identity politics these days, and Michelle Wu represents quite a few elements. Young, female, person of color, but she seems to want to keep her progressive approach, transcend those labels, and lead. It's kind of interesting. Former City Councilor Ayanna Pressley has been labeled as part of a squad of women of color in Congress, yet she keeps saying she just wants to work, and subtly it appears President Trump talks about her less than the other 3. Maybe it's because she's African American and he's wary of alienating that voting bloc, or maybe he respects her approach more than the others. Regardless, Wu looks to Pressley, to Elizabeth Warren. One just wants to work, the other a hardworking policy wonk, and it seems to work for both of them, and both seem to be influencing how Michelle Wu approaches her job, and it'll probably be how she approaches something like running for mayor, if it is something she decides to do. That's it for this week. I'm Brian Schactman, and this is Talk Politics.